So I talked a little bit about this in my last video talking about Halo, but you know what? Screw it. Let's talk about it some more and let's have an open discussion and piss even more people off. Why is sprint in Halo something that really irks players? Why is this mechanic of all things what people despise the most when it includes the games? The original trilogy and ODST did not feature sprint as a mechanic in the game, mainly because the levels and enemies were designed in a way that made it unnecessary. CE was created in a time where the base speed was equivalent to the top speed of the player character, similar to the approach taken by Half-Life, where the player utilizes the movement and the enemies are built around it. And that was the baseline for how they made the games going forward up until Halo Reach. Made in 2010, Reach was the swan song for Bungie before they departed from Microsoft. So Reach was meant to be the experimental piece for them as they tested out some new features that they never tried out before. So they included armor abilities that players can pick up in the campaign or choose before going into a multiplayer match. One of the options for these armor abilities was, you guessed it, sprint. But the thing that people tend to forget when it comes to the discussion of sprint in Halo Reach is that it is one of many abilities that you can use. We also have stuff like Armor Lock, Hologram, Drop Shield, Evade, Jetpack, and when you swap to one of these, you got rid of sprint, making it a choice of playstyle rather than the norm, as most of these abilities can be seen as useful for their own reasons, in a similar way to how the equipment worked in Halo 3. And some of the stuff that was equipment in 3 came back as armor abilities in Reach, like Active Camo. However, when we move on to the 343 games, where all their titles from Halo 4 to Infinite feature sprint as a built-in ability that every player can utilize. This is also accompanied by new armor abilities added to each game. And since then, sprint has become a frowned-upon mechanic in each game going forward from Halo 4. And as someone who hates the 343 games with a burning passion, I have a whole laundry list of reasons why I dislike them. But sprint isn't one of them. To me, it's always a symptom rather than the cause, because if you remove it from Halo 4, you still have a shitty art style with infuriating enemy design with the Prometheans, and if you remove it from Halo 5, you still have the crappy squad-based tactics that barely function. If you remove it from Halo Infinite, you still have a tedious open world with check-off tasks. Not to mention the multiplayer that has gotten more competitive focused. Now, Halo has always been a competitive game. Many will try to deny it, but will forget the fact that Halo 2 and 3 were the biggest proponents of MLG, and any old school player can remark on the fact that they or someone in their party chat has screamed out the words MLG Pro after getting an overkill. The thing is that Halo was good at balancing competitive aspects with casual ones, and the competitive side was something that was encouraged and controlled by the fans. The developers simply gave them the tools to do so. However, with Halo 4 and 5, they leaned way more into the competitive aspect and started to include shit like loadouts into the multiplayer. Suddenly, when you look at Halo gameplay and compare it to something like Call of Duty, a game with sprinting and loadouts, it starts to look a little too similar. And that is why I think a lot of fans despise sprint so much. It takes away the distinction of the series and the identity. Many things went into the Halo series being noticeable and memorable from a gameplay sense. Art style, gunplay, time to kill, and map design. However, the closer it got to resembling Call of Duty, the more it lost the feel of the original games, which also reflected in the art style, map design, and gunplay of the newer games. And I believe this is the problem that people have with sprint. Not necessarily the mechanic itself, though that is a factor, but rather it's an aspect that veered the games away from the style and direction of the Bungie Halo games. And people will be quick to say, but what about Reach? Bungie made that game, so if you want to blame someone, blame them. And while I can understand the reasoning for people saying that, as I have said a similar thing for titles like Fallout 2 and Modern Warfare 2 with their respective series, keep in mind, like I said before, that Reach was an experimental game that was Bungie's final endeavor. Compare that to the 3 attempts made by a team that couldn't even stay employed for each of the projects, and have struck out so hard that they think a name change will make things better. But in conclusion, no. I don't think Sprint is the biggest problem in Halo. It's just a symptom of a greater cause, and it's an add-on to the issues that have plagued the series for years now, and led to the loss of identity of the IP and the division of the community. Halo as an IP has gone through some of the worst conditions it has ever been in, not just with the disappointing titles that 343 has come out with, but the shitty launch of MCC on Xbox, the lack of support of MCC on PC, the abandonment of Infinite, and the travesty that is the Paramount series. The best thing to come out of the IP is a collab with a game that is owned by fucking Sony, which blesses my ODST heart. But you know what? Despite all of those faults and all of those disappointments, that won't stop me from loving Halo. I will play the games that I love with the MCC, because that is easy to do. It may not have the support that I'd like it to have, but these games deserve to be preserved and experienced by new and old players alike. And the reason for all this division and outrage is that there are many who love this series and just want to see it thrive again. Unfortunately, I don't think that will ever happen. Halo had its time to shine, and it's a shining beacon of history, but it won't reach that height ever again that it had in 2007. It doesn't mean we can't remember it though, because I will never forget.